What do Tractor Supply, Neiman Marcus, Johnson & Johnson, Dow, Lego, Northrop Grumman, and dozens of other companies all have in common? They are all a part of the Future of Work Leaders community. This is a global community of the world's top people leaders shaping the future of work and employee experience. If you're interested in learning more and requesting an invite, and if you are a chief human or chief people officer, then head on over to futureofworkleaders.com. Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Future Ready Leadership. My guest today, Lisa Bodell. She's the founder of a company called FutureThink and the best-selling author of a few books. One is called Kill the Company, and the second one is called Why Simple Wins. Lisa, thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me. It's really a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to speaking with you. You're always, you're on the other side of the coast in New York, and so I'm on Los Angeles. So it's, bringing the coasts together. The name of the podcast is obviously called Future Ready Leadership. So my very first question for you is, when you hear that phrase "future ready" connected to leadership, what does that mean to you? What does being a future ready leader mean to you?
To me, it's about the difference between being planned and being prepared, which is kind of
I like that.
a funny thing to say. Yeah, I feel like so many leaders write the best made plans, but they're not agile and resilient enough to really be prepared. And myself as a futurist, right? Futuring is about thinking proactively about what could happen. And we don't do enough of that. We drown too much in the plan, the annual plan, and then we put it away, and then we're not prepared for what's happened. So, future ready to me is about being agile, being resilient, and also being able to come up with the ability to react to the unplanned and the unnecessary, because that's really what's happening in our world. We are in perma crisis.
Yep.
That's a new thing right now. People are burned out. So the more prepared we are, the better.
Tell me about your experience with the whole futurist angle and being a futurist. So I was very fascinated in this space, I don't know, for decades, 20 years ago. I used to be a big fan of like science fiction movies and novels, so much so that I then went back to school at the University of Houston to get my professional certification in Foresight there. And
were you at Clear Lake?
Where?
At Houston and Clear Lake. That's where Peter Bishop was and Andy Hines.
So I worked with Peter Bishop and
yep, they're my good friends.
oh, what's the other guy's name?
And Andy?
Yes.
No?
Yeah.
Andy Hines.
Yeah. Andy Hines and Peter. Yeah, there you go. This was what year was this? This was probably 15 years ago or something. I went back there, but yeah, I was in the class with Peter Hines. Andy Hines and Peter Bishop. Let me get that straight.
That's right.
So yeah, it was a lot of fun, and I mean, I learned so much. I was always reading books on foresight and that kind of thinking, but I always thought it would be really cool to just see how futurists are trained and how they think. So what's been your experience with that? Because the challenge is anybody on LinkedIn now, they go up online and they put like futurist, and it kind of like sounds cool.
Don't start me,
Okay.
please.
Yeah, but a lot of people don't realize that it's actually a discipline. You can get a master's degree in it. You can get a certification in it. And every time I go on LinkedIn, everyone's got futurist in there. So,
well, it drives me crazy.
yes,
It drives me nuts.
Yeah, unpack a little bit about what that means and what does being a futurist mean, and what's the difference between just kind of slapping it on LinkedIn versus just the mental approach that a futurist actually has for solving problems and thinking about the future?
Well, first of all, the fact that you went down there and actually got a degree, I have the utmost respect for, because that's what I was just going to start to talk about, which is I am a trained practicing futurist. And studying the Alvin Toffler. In fact, I was in the book that celebrated his 50 years of Toffler.
That's so cool. Oh man, it's such a, I don't know. I feel like back in the day, there used to be a lot more, prestige, mystery, elegance around this idea of foresight and being a futurist. And today it just became so, commercialized and so, it's like going to the store and seeing 100 different types of brands of candy on there, whereas before it used to have this like elegant packaging around it and it was so special. But now everybody's calling themselves that.
Right. It's the same thing with like everyone that's, and respectfully, I was in advertising. Everyone that works in advertising, they think they're creative, therefore they're trendsetters or they know about trends. It's very different when you think about trends versus futuring.
Yeah.
So, and there's a difference between futuring and foresight, right? So, for the listeners that don't know the difference, right? Foresight is about, the structured plan structure around change, right? Possible, probable, preferable scenarios of the future. And there's a structured way to think about change. And so you can actually drive it, not react to it.
Mm-hmm.
And the study of change is what futurists do. And that's why companies like Shell do scenario planning, right? They work with people like us that are trained in forecasting, backcasting, all these tricks, or not tricks, techniques that can help you better be prepared as well as planned for the future.
Yeah.
So I always say to people, if I really want to get better at this, what should I do? And I say study foresight.
Mm-hmm.
And, whether it's in Houston or Manoa or Leeds or where some of the other places that
I think those are the top
futurists.
three, right? I mean, like I remember when I was looking at this 15 years ago, it was either I go to Hawaii, I go to some
Yeah.
place in the UK, or I go to University of Houston. And I'm like, well, University of
You
Houston
want to
is,
use them. Yeah.
yeah, there's not a lot of options.
Well, and there's a reason for that, right? Because a lot of the oil and energy companies are the ones that
Yeah.
started all this.
Yeah.
They're the ones that engaged in it first. So that's why they're down in Houston. But the reason it's so important is because I think people that really study it, they have a better perspective. They have the long view, right? Rather than the trends.
Mm-hmm.
So, and there are structured ways to think about all the things that are happening and the dots that intersect them. So, I actually fell into futuring by accident.
Mm.
This was over 20 years ago when Andy was still, he was the lead futurist at Dow Chemical. And my family is from the city where Dow Chemical is based, Midland, Michigan. I mean, it's this tiny town. It's weird. And for some reason, I don't know why, I wanted to learn what this thing was. And I said, I'm visiting my grandparents in the town where Dow Chemical is. Will you meet me for coffee? And we met at the only coffee shop in downtown Midland. And he was literally, I think, leaving Dow Chemical that day for good. It was weird. And he said, you got to join this lonely club called the APF, the Association for Professional Futurists, right?
Yep.
Join the World Future Society and really get to know what this is like. And it changed my world. It really did,
Mm.
right? Because it made me think bigger and more far reaching about the future than just trend spotters, right? That really just look at the next year.
Yeah. Yeah. I actually just wrote an article. Compass Magazine, is that the Association of Professional Futurists? Oh, yeah, I
That's
just
right.
did an article for them in their recent edition.
Oh,
That
great.
came out fairly recently. And yeah, it's such an interesting space. Did you ever meet Alvin Toffler?
No, I did not ever meet him.
Okay.
But you mentioned it's interesting science fiction,
Yeah, oh,
right?
yeah.
And right, so much he was talking about, and when he was originally writing is, well, this is also like the Ray Bradbury and all that, but so much of our future is based on our current knowledge of science fiction. Like that's how we start to envision the future is based on all the movies and what used to be the cartoons and the books. And those are the long view people.
Yeah.
That's what's really interesting, and they drove so much of foresight.
Yeah, and for people not familiar with Alvin Toffler, I think he's most famous for the book Future Shock, right? I mean, he obviously did
That's
a
right.
lot of things, but a lot of people will probably remember him for that. And wasn't there like, he talked about the first wave or the second wave? He had a bunch of different like frameworks and stuff like that he created, but he was a super inspirational.
Influential.
Yeah, very influential person in this space.
He was the first person to really think about to teach people that you could drive change, that you could drive the future, because everyone kind of had this before that, this kind of fatalistic
Yeah.
view of it, meaning it just kind of happens. What will be will be. And he said, no, 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 right? The future's not a straight line. It's a winding road. You can shape it, depends on the path you take. And that was really revolutionary, right? And then the military called him in, and the army, et cetera. And that really led to what is today foresight and planning. I mean, it really drove a lot of also strategic planning. The book that came out 50 years later from Future Shock is Aftershock. And so people that are listening should get both. Read Future Shock, and then read Aftershock. And what that is the top 50 futurists reflecting on the brilliance of Toffler, right? And how he shaped the world. So I and like you, I really am about people taking a structured view to change so they can be planful and drive it.
Yeah.
Because there's power, right, in looking at scenarios. There's not one, there's many.
And so I guess 20 years ago when you met Andy, did you then go through the program? Did you just kind of study with him, do on your own? Like, how did you
Both.
learn all these
I
different
didn't go
things?
through, yeah, through the APF, World Future Society, and my conversations with him, and engaging many of them over the years to teach for me and my company, FutureThink, here in New York City. We do Foresight days with executives to help them really think through their strategic planning and really get people jazzed. What happens with so many companies is they call in their agencies or creative thinkers to come in and let's connect different dots. But those are brainstorming exercises. Those aren't foresight exercises, right? And it's been really transformative for the organizations that we do it with. And I engage a lot of people that come out of Clear Lake
Yeah.
to help me with those sessions.
I think one of the things I'd love to ask you about, I'm just making a note here, maybe we can get to that in a little bit, is about exercises and examples of exercises. Maybe people after listening and watching this can try some on their own. But before we get into that, I would love to hear any example. You mentioned Shell, and I think they had that famous story, wasn't it, in the 70s, where it was they engaged a futurist to do some scenario planning about the future of oil. I don't remember exactly what the whole story was there. But can you give any examples of how companies are using this and what the benefit is for them? And I don't know if you remember that Shell story. I remember just high level details.
Well, I'll give you a riff on it today.
Okay.
The idea is that taking the long view helps you prepare not just kind of like the resources that you need or the money that you need for the future, but it also helps you with the talent that you need for the future. So let's say you're an oil and energy company today. And what they've realized is that in the future, they might not extract energy, they might grow it. And that's from looking at things like STEEP, an acronym you and I know, looking at driving forces that are social, technological, economic, environmental, and political, right? And so when you look at all those buckets, what was really a driving force, they don't have to change, right? They've got more money than God at these oil and energy companies, and there's plenty of supply. They could be fat, dumb, and happy as long as they want. But thinking about what pressures could happen to them, particularly around climate change, in the future, they might have to grow energy. That could be wind, it can be solar, whatever. And so what they realized was in some of these oil and energy companies is that they aren't going to, in the future, need geoscientists. They're going to need bioscientists. And so they're going to have to hire very different people. There are not enough bioscientists going through the education system globally in the pipeline for them to be able to be hired. And so they realized that their strategy then had to change to start competing with other industries to steal them. And so what's interesting, because I also work with pharma companies, is they realized that where they were going to have to get their talent is to steal it from pharmaceutical companies. And so suddenly, and I say this all the time, and it blows people's minds in the audience. I said, so for the first time, pharmaceutical companies realize that they are competing for talent with energy companies.
Yeah.
That never would have happened 10 years ago. But that's what Foresight does. And that's mind-blowing, right? Mind-blowing.
So most of the time when companies call you in, what are they asking for? Like in what situation would somebody need a futurist to come in and do some sort of scenario planning or foresight or strategic discussions? Is it about kind of like basic stuff? Should we acquire this company or not? Is it thinking 5-10 years down the road? Like when you get brought in, what is it usually for? And when is a good time to bring in a futurist?
Great point. Well, first of all, it's around they're trying to innovate, right? Either they're looking for new hunting grounds, right, as we call it,
Okay.
areas where they can disrupt, and they want some fresh juice to be brought in from the outside, long-term views, so people that can really bring in fresh thinking. So that's when we get called, or it's a precursor to their annual strategic planning. So, the innovation part is we really need to disrupt. Either we're thinking big or we're stalled. It could be either of those, or before strategic planning. I frankly think it should be an annual exercise where they bring us in before strategic planning. And here's why. Because strategic planning, in my opinion, is broken. It is the same rinse and repeat every year. I mean, my joke is, strategic planning each year starts when somebody on the team opens up last year's PowerPoint, changes the date to this year, and it's begun. Woo! Now we just fill in the slides and we do some crappy SWOT analysis or whatever. And we think we're in a groove, but we're in a rut, right? We're not really disrupting when we do that. So if you brought in a Foresight or, someone from Futuring beforehand, you could really think through to be not just planned, but prepared for scenarios. What are all the things, the headwinds that are really coming against us and things we should really start to plan now for the future?
Okay.
That's how people really come to us.
Okay.
It's fun.
So maybe we can unpack that a little bit so people can get maybe a little bit more insight on just how this all works. I'm always fascinated, interested in this space as well. So let's say somebody calls you in. I don't know, maybe they're an oil company, pharma company, technology company, and they say, we're trying to think about the future, next, 2, 3, 4, 5 years, looking for new hunting grounds. What is the process to help an organization or a leadership team discover those things? Like, can you walk through the process? How long does all of this take? Is the deliverable a PowerPoint for them? How do they use the information? How does all of this work?
Yeah. So basically, you can do it over a couple months because you need some preparing time, and then it culminates in a 1 to 2 day session.
Okay.
So and the output of that is it can vary, but really it's scenarios for the future. Prioritize scenarios for the future that then they can explore and do research on. So basically what we do is we start by doing a survey with them online, and it's usually about 10 questions. But what that does is it really gauges their ability to think further than the next quarter, which can be a challenge for people. And what do they really know about the future? So, because another thing about futuring isn't just getting it from the consultants that come in, but how do you set up a structure so people keep more on top of it on an ongoing basis, right?
Mm-hmm.
Keep their antenna up.
Yeah.
And so we ask them what is a headline, this, that a year from now or 10 years from now is going to be said about your company? What am I going to read about you? And what will it really have said? So what do you think the future is going to look like? What are the sources where you get your juice from all the time? What do you think the biggest driving forces are that would completely take you out of business and kill your company? We ask them those kinds of questions so we kind of get a gauge or a baseline of, here's how these people think. How open to a scenario are they? And that really informs us around the trends that we will come in and really present to them to get their juices going. And the trends are, we call it within, adjacent, beyond. So the trends can be within their industry, what's really affecting them, but also from the larger zeitgeist, adjacent to beyond. Those could be demographic trends, right? And usually they don't even think about those because they think those are boring. And then through a presentation and session where we have some interactivity, we start to have them do two things. One, start thinking about, based on these trends, what are some new ideas you would come up for your company? And then the other thing we do is we actually take an afternoon and we kill their company. And we say, based on these trends, how would you put yourself out of business? So we can identify their biggest weaknesses. Again, being prepared. And so it's kind of a 1-2 punch, right? Get them prepared for the future, but also acknowledge where their weaknesses are because they got to shore them up based on the stuff we just presented. And they love it. I mean, it just lights it on fire for them.
Yeah, it's fun. I mean, I always tell people it's very similar to playing chess, where you can't predict the move that your opponent is going to make on the board, but you can anticipate one of several moves that they might make on the board. And if those moves appear, then you should have a response back for what you might do. And whenever people always ask me, the role of a futurist, like, what is that about? That's kind of the analogy that I give them. It's, nobody's predicting the future, but you're trying to think of these different scenarios so that before you move your pawn or before you move your knight, you can anticipate what your opponent might do and how you might respond. Because the worst thing, and I played competitive chess, the worst thing is that when you make a move on the board, your opponent does something, you're like, uh-oh, I didn't see that coming.
Yeah, so I think, exactly.
And then you're like, I can't stop checkmate. And you're like, oh, I wish I would have taken a couple extra minutes and just looked at that position more before making my move. And that to me is really where this way of thinking and these frameworks and everything is so useful and valuable. And I love that you go in there and give them this exercise of how to kill the company. I think that's actually a pretty cool thing for leaders who are listening and watching to this, something they can think about too.
Yeah, it's transformative because it's just a packaged way. Sometimes what happens with futuring is it intimidates them. right?
Yeah.
Of like, they feel, a bad futurist or someone who calls himself a futurist will go in and like flood them with just so much information or just the sexy information, right? AI, that's fine. But there's lots of other unsexy information that they got to think about, like demographic trends,
Yeah.
right? And so I think giving them a kind of a business framework for futuring, killing the company, is a great way for them to be able to have an approach for them to think about their existing company, unearth what's wrong, bulletproof it, make it future ready, and then start to put in place different scenarios based on the research. So it's cool, and it also takes away the fear
Yeah.
around the future too.
And it's so important and valuable. I mean, a lot of people forget that things like flying cars and augmented and virtual reality, these were concepts that were developed decades ago and still have not
Decades.
come to fruition. And even now, especially like in the HR space, so many people are, at least in media outlets and through pundits and stuff like that, you keep hearing about AI going to take away jobs, or use AI to help you figure out the skills that you need to have and promote people based on that. But then the truth is, when I talk to a lot of the CHROs and we go over different scenarios and possibilities, a lot of them are actually understanding and realizing that it's not quite so simple, and it's not
It's
necessarily
not.
the future that will happen, right? Because before you get into any kind of predicting, the first thing that a lot of people forget is you need to have accurate data and information. And that
Yeah.
is almost an impossible thing to do inside of a 100,000 person company, to make sure that every single employee has accurate, up-to-date information about the skills, what they're working on,
100%.
what they're learning, for AI to predict it. So, being able to think like this, I think, is just such a useful and valuable skill for people to have.
Well, yeah, so you just brought up a few things that are really interesting. One is, when I heard about you and Future Ready, what I love about it is, because we talk about this too, we make teams future ready by giving them, human-centered skills.
Mhm.
So this is around things like, it's not AI, it's curiosity,
Yeah.
it's agility, it's resilience. It's those things that we continually want in leaders, but we dramatically underestimate that they need to be trained on them, right? And especially in the world of AI, like now more than ever, it's all about the prompt. It's all about how curious are you? Because you can get any answer you want. Are you asking the right questions? So, and it's never been a more important time to be human, because, yeah, there's lots of data, but how they put it together and how you put that kind of creative sheen on it, like myself as a writer, AI just doesn't do it that well
Hmm.
yet.
Yeah.
The other thing I'll tell you that I really like about what you said is, so much of what happens when people come in and start talking about information like AI, it's going to put us out of work, it's going to whatever, is they drive so much fear. And the power that I think Foresight brings is to take away the fear by actually addressing it head on. So, when we do like futures wheels, right? And you address the positive and
Yeah.
negative of
Yeah.
something. All right. And for the listeners, Jacob and I know this is a technique that we use in Foresight, where you put a kind of a news headline or a current thing that's happening, and you extrapolate. And what you do is you extrapolate all the positive things that could happen and all the negative things that could happen from it. And what's really interesting is you start to see so many possibilities on both sides. And then you choose your own adventure,
Yeah.
right? But we tend to operate more on the fear side than the hopeful side. And that's something that we need to teach leaders to do a better job of.
Yeah, I think I actually still have the book from the University of Houston, right? They give you kind of the workbook to go through. Yeah, they had all sorts of really interesting ones. So I remember the futures wheel, and they had what was the other wheel? A causal, I can't remember what it was called, like a cause and relationship wheel that was in there. The cone of
Sure.
possibilities.
Yes,
Yeah,
kind of
so all those fun.
possibility.
I love the cone. That's out of all the frameworks, the cone is the one that I use the most.
Oh,
It's
yeah.
fantastic.
Mhm.
So maybe we can walk through just a couple examples, and I know people, a lot of people who are listening and watching, this is probably their first introduction into these concepts and ideas and what this means and how this looks. So without overwhelming people, if they wanted to kind of play around with some of these ideas and frameworks in their own company or in their small teams, do you have any favorite frameworks or places to get started? I know, for example, we talked about the cone, the steep framework, which I think there's even like a steeple framework that was expanded to.
It was.
Where do you recommend just kind of starting to learn about this? And do you have any favorite easier frameworks to go through?
Well, those are I happen to think like Steep and the Futures Wheel are easy. And same with Cone of Possibility. So it's just getting access to them online. I mean, you
Okay.
can obviously Google it, but also, if I'm remembering correctly, if it was Peter's book, Bishop, Shaping the Future was a really good
Yeah,
book
yeah, yeah.
that with Andy, right? Which was a really good book to walk through all these frameworks. So people could get it's like a taste test and a poo-poo platter of all the 101 versions and start to kind of put themselves through it.
Hmm.
So, they're easy. They're easy. They're just a structured way to think about change. So you can drive it, not be worried about
Yeah.
it.
Is there one that you think, or maybe one or two or three that we can introduce the listeners and viewers to so they can understand what this even is?
Yeah. So, I mean, one of the things that I like, so we were talking about the futures wheel, right?
Yeah.
That's a really good
Yeah,
one
yeah. Why don't we start
about
with
how
that
you,
one and what that is and how it works and what do you do?
yeah. So, futures wheel is meant to show you, possible extrapolations that could happen from an event, and both positive and negative. And so basically it's like you envision on a piece of paper an event.
Okay.
And so you could say, I'm trying to think of a good one.
Would an event
Grocery.
be, does it need to be something very specific or can it be broad? So for example, could it be AI becomes as smart as humans? Or does it need to be something very specific like we acquire company ABC?
It can be both.
Okay.
So, AI becomes this,
Gets to human
transhumanist.
intelligence or whatever.
Right, yeah, transhumanist. So we're here. And then we would say all the positive things that could happen from that.
Okay.
We have so much more free time. And if we had so much more free time, what would happen with that? Maybe we could actually put ourselves to work and we would volunteer full time and clean up climate change. And what would happen if we did that? So you just keep going and going and going. And there may be many offshoots to those things. So you start to getting this kind of spider web of all the positive implications. But then down below, usually you do the positive in green and the negative in red. You do the same thing. AI is as smart as humans. We go into a deep depression. Humans lack purpose.
Yeah.
The disintegration of communities and family. I mean, it can just keep going on and on. But you start to see the implications of that, and sometimes they start to merge because you see opportunities in the negative to help solve them and make them positive.
Okay.
So really, all that is just there are templates online that you could see, so you could start filling in and trying to solve implications of implications. Easy.
Okay. All right. So with that, so let's say somebody does that. And you could probably do this in a few hours, get your team together,
Yeah.
or in a day or two. So let's say you do that and you're with your team, you kind of go through that process. What do you do with that after you've completed it? Do you just have conversations about it? Do you create plans based on that? Like what's the next?
So we did some work with EA, EA Sports, with game company, right? And I think Madden, whatever, FIFA. And basically what we did is we filled out futures wheels, right, with teams. So you pick an event, and each table then can either have the same event or different events, and they come up with extrapolations. Then what you do is you have discussions around what do we think the most likelies are, right, probabilities, and what's our basis for that. And then you take them and you do a little research on it. Right. Then you say, okay, so let's do some research. What would happen if they do this? Are the people that we think could actually drive this really well suited for it? So you get some kind of, probability. And then based on that, you can use those as your scenarios for strategic planning. If this happened, then we would do this. If this happened, then we would do that. So this gets into the not just planning phase, but then prepared phase, and you bake it into your strategic planning.
Okay.
That's typically how that works.
Okay.
If nothing else, it is a fantastic discussion for your team to get them thinking about the future and teach them to think in terms of possibilities, right, and probabilities. The future is not binary. It's not all or nothing. And that alone is a win.
What do Tractor Supply, Neiman Marcus, Johnson & Johnson, Dow, Lego, Northrop Grumman, and dozens of other companies all have in common? They are all a part of the Future of Work Leaders community. This is a global community of the world's top people leaders shaping the future of work and employee experience. If you're interested in learning more and requesting an invite, and if you are a chief human or chief people officer, then head on over to futureofworkleaders.com. Okay, I love that one. I think that's something very simple. A lot of people can implement. Do you have any others that you like? Maybe one or two. Maybe the cone, I think, is probably a very simple one. And I don't know. Maybe we can go through the steep, because that's also, I think, a very helpful way to think, unless you think it's too complicated.
No, I'd say steep, and then I'd say headlines. I mean, quickly on steep, just keeping it very basic for people that aren't futuring. The idea is everyone's like, I want to start thinking about the future, but you need kind of an organizing framework to do that, right? There's so many trends. And that's why when somebody comes and they presents on trends and they just give you something around it's usually all technology. And to me, that shows a real naivete. STEEP helps you look at trends in terms of, right, what STEEP stands for: social, technological, economic, environmental, political. And so what's really interesting about that then is what you do is you look at your business and you say, what are all the trends in each of those areas or in the larger zeitgeist that are happening today? And then pick out some of those trends and figure out what is the implication on your industry and on your business, right? So climate change, that could have, go back to oil and energy, that can have a lot of implication for them, or it has no implication for them. Oil's going to be around forever. Doesn't matter. Don't care. So to me, it's just an organizing principle where you can take STEEP and start to organize your thoughts, gather data, and use that as a springboard for planning. That's like the most basic thing, organizing your research.
Yeah, and that's a very, very helpful one. And then, so you mentioned headlines. What is that one?
Headlines is great because basically what you want to do is you give people a framework to say, in the future, I want you to fill in this headline, right? It's the year X. Our company is doing X, and the proof of this is X. And so what it makes them start to think about is how, and you give different tables or different teams, different timelines for the future, right? Your future in 5 years is going to be different than 10 years. It's going to be different than 50 years. And then you start to see like what's the main trend that is driving and what's their vision for what they think you're going to be doing. And it just starts a discussion, right? We do that all the time at the very start of our brainstorms to get people thinking about a further and further future than just 1, 3, and 5 years. So that's a framework. And you can Google some of those frameworks online in terms of headlines.
Okay. Yeah, you can also make these fun, right? I mean, I've even done the postcard from the future. If you were writing a postcard from the future to your current self, what would that postcard look like? What would you say? So they're like fun ways that you can do these things too, which always gets people to to have a good time.
Yeah, and it's not only is it fun, but it makes you see how people think about the future. Some people think of it as 3 years, and some people think of it flying cars 50 years.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Can we walk through the cone as well? Because I also think that's maybe a practical and useful one. Do you ever use that in any of your?
I don't use it as much.
Okay.
I don't. So I mean, you can kick it off talking about
Is
the
it not
cone if you
as
want.
no? Well, if you don't think it's as useful or valuable, I don't want to waste people's time.
No, I do think it is. For me, it's a way for people to think about a future construct, but how we activate it typically is through looking at different horizons. That's how we look at it.
Okay. So when you say horizons, can you unpack that for people too? Because I remember, I think it was PwC years ago, they had these different horizons that they created. It was like a blue world, a teal world, an orange world. This was probably like 6-7 years ago.
The 3 horizons.
Yeah, exactly. And so when you say horizons, what does that mean, and how do people think about those horizons? How should you approach thinking about those horizons?
Horizons was just a really great way to boil down futuring into a corporate speak, in my opinion. So, I mean, brilliant for them to do that.
Yeah.
So, it's Horizon 1, Horizon 2, and Horizon 3 thinking. And the most simplest, dumbest down way to think of it is Horizon 1 is the near future, right? It's your what the shareholders care about in the next. You can define the horizons, right? 1 to 3 years. Horizon 2 is a mid future, right? So that can be 3 to 7 years. And then Horizon 3, further out, that can be, 10 to 20 years. Most people don't get out that far, right? Yeah. But if you're an oil and energy company, you do, because building a platform takes a long time. And that really, what that allowed them to do was think about rather than in terms of quarters. It allowed them to think about what kind of company are we going to be in the short term, near term, and long term. And when they thought about it in terms of horizons, it was aspirational. And it made them think in terms of the business, the resources, and the people they would need. That was cool.
Yeah, yeah. And there's actually a lot of relation to that with the cone. And people can Google cone of possibilities as well. I think I did a video on it. Lots of people have done videos. There's graphics, there's templates. So for anything that we've been talking about, if you just Google like cone of possibilities template or whatever template, steep template, you can find lots of things. And the cone I like because it's really fun, and it's, if for people not familiar with it, you kind of just imagine you're looking through the narrow end of a cone, and the farther out in the cone you are, the more, the longer the time horizon and the more possibilities and scenarios, and the more narrow in the cone you are, that's the closest time horizon, a week, a year, a month, whatever. And that's much easier to predict, whereas the broadest part of the cone, that's kind of like the horizon 3, 5, 7 years. Now you can start to think about all sorts of crazy stuff in there. So,
And the aperture gets wider, right?
yeah.
I mean, there's only so much you can affect in a quarter.
Yeah, and these are really fun exercises, I think, for people. Why don't organizations do this more often? Because it's very rare. I can't actually think of any organization off the top of my head where they even really employ a professional futurist on site. Very rarely do I come across a company that's saying they're doing scenario planning or using any of these tools or frameworks. Is it just because we're so stuck in our day-to-day, kind of heads down, getting tasks off our to-do list that we don't think about the future anymore?
Yes.
That was simple.
I mean, the thing I say is that thinking has become a daring act. We all say that we want more time to think, but we don't have it. People still have to sneak fake meetings on their calendar to be able to think, because if you say you're thinking, that's selfish and that's lazy, and you must not be busy enough, so you must not be relevant enough. So what's the point of your job? So, having time where people just have a job to look long-term and think is seen as a luxury. So I think if it was me, I would have not just a strategy group or a chief strategy officer, because those people are, again, what's our strategy for the next 1, 3, 5 years? That's what they're thinking. You need people that are doing much longer term thinking, as well as doing the research and connecting different dots. I think it's viewed as a luxury. We have a strategic planning group. We got this. And they're more focused on the short term and shareholder value. That's what I think.
So if you were, I don't know, let's say you wave a magic wand and you were in charge of a large organization, how would you structure this? Would you put a team of professional futurists?
We could ask this a lot.
Yeah. So how would you put this inside of an organization if it were a ongoing practice?
Yeah, there's a few ways to do it. The simplest way, I think, to get it bought in is, rather than having a very separate group, is to put it within strategic planning, right? Under the purview of the strategy officer. But their remit is to think about the future beyond, right? Just the 1, 3, and 5 years. And I would have a team that is separate and informs the regular strategic planning team on longer term horizons. This is a horizon 2 to 3 opportunity. And what they do is they actually work with the strategy group to say, what is horizon 2 and 3? Because most people don't even know. They're like, I don't know, 20 years, 50 years. So they set the time. And then they create a structure where they actually gather the information, a small team that looks at longer term horizons and packages that out and presents it to the team on an ongoing basis. So they start to be future ready all the time. And it creates a system, right, that goes into the organization that starts to feed bigger picture thinking, but you need someone in charge of it. And I think reporting to the CSO is the easiest way to get it embedded. It doesn't need to be a large team.
Yeah, I like that approach. Do you have any examples of companies that you think are doing a good job of this? I know you worked with a lot of organizations. Or do any stories come to mind of how a company has used this, and opportunities they've been able to uncover, or maybe threats they've been able to avoid? What comes to mind as far as exemplars in this space?
Yeah, it's interesting. Companies that have the longest development cycles are the ones that do a good job on it. So that's really oil and energy, and often within pharma.
Okay.
And within pharma particularly, it's not like they call them futures, it's within their R&D. right? So it's within their drug pipeline development
Yeah.
because it's such a long time to get a drug to market. So we really need to be thinking about disease and human health for the long term. So they're the ones that do it. But that's not to say that other people can't. I'm going to give you an example. I was just talking yesterday in Kansas City. A local development council in Waco actually they didn't kill the company, they killed the community. And
Wow.
what they did, proactive obsolescence, is they were stuck. They had a small group. They wanted to think bigger. They didn't know how to do it. And they actually took the exercise, kill the company, and turned it into kill the community. And I'm using this as an example because, you don't have to be a big company to think big picture. And what they realized is they had so many weaknesses in short-term thinking that they actually turned that on its head and started to use as a 10x multiplier rather than us keeping, as a local development group to turn Waco around. Remember, Waco used to be known for the cult, not Joanna Gaines now and her big, what is it, Magnolia Empire. I
Yeah.
mean, that's like a big turnaround for Waco.
Yeah.
But they've systematically decided to embed in plan around arts, culture, and light infrastructure. And they also started to plan around they worked with all these local development groups, these like local civic agencies, and communicated separately to each of the silos. And instead, they created a forum for all of them to come together, communicate once to them, and then have them be the 10x multipliers and make difference within the community. So what I'm telling you is that there's lots of ways, large and small, to kind of think about the future in new ways. And using that kill the company exercise, you can even be a local development group to be able to use that and start thinking bigger picture and use your resources better for the long term.
Yeah.
Developing a community isn't a 1-year effort, it's 10 years.
One of my favorite examples, we talked about Shell, but I think right now I just tried Googling this too. If people just Google Shell Foresight or Shell scenarios, they actually built a really cool website where they talk about.
You're talking about game changers? Is that what you're talking about?
No, this one is just, I know that one that you're talking about. Is Game Changers still around?
No, Game Changers is not. But it's morphed into something
Yeah,
else.
I remember Game Changers. Oh man, that was from like more than a decade ago, wasn't it? It was a while ago.
Yeah, but the idea, to your point, is like scenario planning, right?
Yeah.
And Shell is the godfather of it.
Yeah. But if people just Google like Shell Foresight, you can see they have Shell scenarios, they have the team, what are the scenarios, and even right on the page, they ask a couple basic questions. Is hydrogen the future? What's the role of biofuels? How long until all the world's cars are electric? And so they think through all these different scenarios and possibilities. And I think people who are interested, if you go to that website, it just really helps you understand more how they structure the team and how they think through these things, which I think one of the few companies, if any, I know that actually has this on their site.
Yeah, they're one of the only. Actually, Samsung used to do it, and Siemens used to do it. Siemens actually used to put out a magazine about the future.
They did.
They don't anymore. And what was interesting about it was because they wanted to be the ones that were kind of saying, we drive the future, but then they wanted to get other people involved to help them drive it together, right? You don't know everything about everything. So how can we get more voices? So, going back to your earlier question about if you organized a futures group within the CSO's office, Chief Strategy Officer, I would also have that group be in charge of future forums. And what that does is bring in outside experts in to talk about what is the future of hydrogen cars? What is the future of floating liquid natural gas, whatever? And what do all the experts think? And how do we get them to actually work with us to do joint research, all the things? So you can actually be the one shaping the future, not just reading about it. And that's a really cool thing to do.
Yeah, and it's also fun.
It's completely fun.
Yeah,
I mean, you get to meet so many cool people.
Yeah. What do you think about the state of kind of the business and innovation landscape today? Because, a lot of what we've been talking about in the realm of foresight and futuring is very much about innovation, right? Looking at new hunting grounds, trying to mitigate threats, identify opportunities. When you look at the business landscape today, how good of a job are we doing? Are you worried about innovation at companies around the world? What's your kind of just general sense of where we are?
I'm always hopeful, right? I wouldn't be a futurist if I wasn't hopeful because I think there's so much potential out there. The reality, though, is I think we've been so stalled globally, both by people are burned out on the variety, velocity, volume of change. So that's an issue, right? People are just burned out by this perma-crisis thing. and they haven't been prepared. And as a result of that, they're just trying to keep their head above water. So real big breakthrough innovations aren't happening at the pace that they used to. It's interesting. I gave a forum. I was at a forum and I spoke on a panel with Steve Wozniak and a few others last year. And Steve talks about this a lot. He says, there hasn't been a big innovation out of Apple in a long time. I mean, the phones aren't that different. It's just the camera, and everyone knows it. It's just a joke. So what is the real innovation coming out of there? I mean, you could say it's like, I don't know, they have innovations for their stock buybacks. It's not true consumer innovation. It's not changing the world.
Yeah.
So I feel that it's stalled. And this whole thing around permacrisis is going to make it so it's harder and harder for people to innovate because they're constantly on their heels, right? They're on back, they're reacting, they're not driving.
Yeah, that's interesting. I was actually just trying to think of what has been, probably ChatGPT has been the biggest.
By far.
Yeah, but besides ChatGPT, if you were to think of anything else, I don't know. It's hard to think of anything else that really comes to mind that is at that scale. The whole metaverse stuff never really took off. The augmented virtual reality is still kind of puttering around out there. So there's not too much. I mean, Elon Musk catching a rocket ship in midair was pretty cool.
That's pretty cool. But I would say this, like the first things we always go towards, and rightfully so, are technology.
Yeah.
Right? But what are some other things that we're doing, like innovations? I mean, it's interesting to me that we have to pause and think. One, because I think we're trained to think in terms of technology, right? Everything's got to be tech. And that's what we fund. So of course, that's what's going to get all the attention. But what are the other true innovations? Like, I'd love it for somebody to come on and be like, oh my God, we've just reinvented schools. That's the kind of thing I'm talking about. Yeah. I mean, it is kind of cool right now how we're starting to share data around, for example, genome data.
Oh,
we're able to that kind of stuff is really, that of course involves technology, but that is true transformation, right? It's not that I can put crap into ChatGPT, it's that I can use it to now do drug development faster for personalized medicine. Yeah. That's big.
Well, speaking of schools, so the two things that came to mind. One, I know some people are working on doing their own, like Jordan Peterson's creating his own academy. I saw an announcement recently from Donald Trump where he said after he becomes elected, he's going to create, what is it called? The American Academy or something like that, where it's going to be accredited. It's going to be free for everybody. It's going to be online. Top professors are going to be teaching there. So it remains to be seen what that will look like and how that will work. But those are sort of the two things that came to mind for school. But you're right. There's not a lot of.
But what, to me, those are ideas.
Yeah.
Those aren't real.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
They're not real.
Everyone's got respectfully, everyone's got ideas, but I mean, that's the easy part, really. Like I was just saying, I've just started reading, and I'm a little late to the party, Brave New Words by Salman Khan, about how do we reinvent school. And one of the things, by the way, I talk about this a lot. I'm very active in my kids' school, although they're grown up now, and in the future of education. And it's always stunning to me how, first of all, the education system is designed not to raise humans, but to raise employees.
Yep.
And we spend a lot teaching about history, but we don't teach anything about the future. And so then, kids get out and they're not prepared for work at all, by the way. So many people in companies are like, the people that are getting out of school, they don't know how to work. They don't have soft skills. They don't have human skills. And that's what's really interesting is I think there's a way to reinvent schools that isn't hard, but it would be completely dismantling what we do right now.
Yeah. Yeah. And sometimes you have to break things and rebuild them to create something better. But yeah, the education space I think is a very interesting one. I think Degreed, there were a couple of organizations I remember years ago that tried to do, you learn these soft skills and you can, or any skill for that matter, micro skills, and you can kind of take them with you wherever you go. But it didn't really take off very much. So yeah, there's still a lot to do there. I know we only have a couple minutes left, but before we wrap up, I thought maybe we could just talk a little bit about strategic planning, just broadly, just to get your thoughts on, do we still need it? Because lots of organizations used to do 5-year plans, 10-year plans, 3-year plans. Should we still be doing strategic plans inside of our organizations?
Well, my gut reaction, I understand where this is going because it's just not working, right? And being able to react in real time. So in that instance, I think you need to have things that you can be monitoring towards. So for example, using Salesforce, using Monday.com, having dashboards that you can react to, I think is something you have to have in place. You can pivot, because if something you thought you should be doing, you shouldn't be, then you can pivot in real time. But strategic planning, do I think we still need it? Yeah, we do. I just think that we need to do it in a different way, because really it becomes a presentation and political exercise, not a real business building exercise. So that's why my opinion was about, killing the company. You've got to give an annual weeding of the garden, so to speak, so people can really say, are we on the right track? And then I think you use your dashboards and these other things in short real time in order to pivot. Otherwise, the time and money that we're spending on these plans, that are PowerPoints, they're not doing anything.
Yeah, no, I agree. They're kind of an exercise in creativity at this point.
Yeah, and alignment. I mean, I know the purpose is to align.
Yeah.
It's marching orders.
Yeah.
But I think how it needs to be done is much simpler.
Okay.
That's all.
So if you were to advise organizations out there or leaders out there who are listening and watching this, and they're thinking, you know what, we want to bring this type of thinking, this way of futuring, of foresight, where do you begin? If you could give people, I don't know, maybe 3 recommendations or 3 steps, where do you begin to at least introduce these concepts and ideas and bring this thinking into the company?
Well, they can call us or they can call you, right? In terms of exploring futuring, I think that's a really good thing that you should do. I would, in my opinion, read up on what futuring and foresight is. And that is the first step, because what it is about getting longer term horizons. Mm-hmm. So doing that kind of research. I also would have a conversation. It depends on what role you're in, right? In terms of look at your current strategy and ask yourself, is there one scenario in here, or are there many? Reading about scenario planning is a really good thing for them to do too, because most people make plans, but they don't make scenarios. And that could be one quick thing for them to do for next year that would give them a little bit more comfort of, if they had to pivot, how would they do it?
And I think now, especially with ChatGPT, the cool thing is you can go into ChatGPT and have it help you do all these really cool things. So it's probably never been easier to at least get started with some of these concepts and ideas. Well, Lisa, where can people... Oh, sorry, go ahead. You were going to say something.
What's interesting is we, and I know others that do this too, we take our strategic plan and we feed it into there.
Really?
And we say, give us probabilities of success and failure around these initiatives.
And how does it do?
And, well, it's to be known. I don't know yet, because we haven't had a full year on how it's predicted it, but it makes us think. Yeah. That's what's really interesting, right? Like, oh, why did it give us a 50% probability? That's not good. And it just further bulletproofs your thinking, or it gives you a plan B. And that's what's really important. Yeah,
it's really interesting how futurists use something like ChatGPT now, because, 5-10 years ago, when I was learning about this, there was no ChatGPT to help you, to guide you, to advise you. Now you can feed all this information into something like ChatGPT and have it do all this analysis for you, which is even more fun.
Super amazing. Yeah.
And people should read Isaac Asimov's The Foundation series and learn about Harry Seldon, who's like, the ultimate futurist character out there who I love, even though Apple butchered The Foundation series. But that's a topic for another day.
Topic?
Yeah. Lisa, where can people go to learn more about you, your company, your books, anything that you want to mention for people to check out?
Yeah. Well, first of all, link in with me. Go to LinkedIn, Lisa Bodell. That'd be great. They can follow me there. I've got lots of work tips, etc. My company is called FutureThink here in New York City. So futurethink.com, and they're welcome to go there and check out some of the things and the resources that we have, or buy my books, right? So I do a lot on Kill the Company. And then I talk about simplicity, because I really think the world's become too complex. And if you don't simplify first, none of the ideas are going to come to your mind. You won't have time to think. So check those out.
Yeah. The Kill the Company piece, I think, is especially a lot of fun.
Me too.
Lisa, thank you so much for taking time out of your day.
Thank you.
I really appreciate it.
Yeah.
And I hope everybody goes to check out your site. My guest again today, Lisa Bodell. She's super easy to find. And you also have I saw on LinkedIn, these micro learning courses too, right? They're like 1 to 2 minutes.
I do. Oh, yeah. I have to tell you, that's the future of my business, which is Accelerated and practical. So yeah, go on there, and there people are welcome to take a look at those so they can get started.
Yeah, I love
It's a
those. They're
great
like
idea.
90 seconds each, and they all have like little tips in there, which is super cool. Well, Lisa, again, thank you so much for taking time out of your day. And thank you everyone for tuning and for listening in. I'll see all of you next time. Thanks for tuning in to today's episode of Future Ready Leadership. If you want to get access to more content on how you can become future ready, make sure to subscribe to the newsletter. It's thefutureorganization.com/newsletter. And if you enjoyed this episode, please send it to somebody who you would like to see become a better leader. Thanks for listening or watching, and I will see you next time.